In your life before Islam, we know that you sang in synagogues. Are you familiar with what they believe?
We had a cantor one time. He loved to go to Palestine and take a bat and beat the legs of the Arabs. In Chicago, where a young Palestinian boy was killed. Oh, I am Palestinian by marriage. I like to wear my Palestinian clothes and my scarf, but I'm careful that when I go out as a woman alone. They're using sort of the Goebbels technique from the Nazi regime. This is not defense. This is occupation. This is atrocity. They talk about international support for Israel. It's not international. They only look at America. Even a friend said to me, she said, "Oh, when you weren't a Muslim, you would have been siding with Israel." I said, "No, I wasn't."
Assalamu Alaikum, Sister Noor Saadaeh. Thank you for accepting our invitation. As Eternal Passenger, we are very happy to have you with us. I want to start with questions about what's going on in Palestine, sadly. So, as you know, in Palestine, our brothers and sisters are being killed, are displaced from their homes. There are babies dying, food, supplies, water, and electricity are cut off. They don't know what to do. How does the American media cover all these events? Are they doing a good job or are they biased?
First of all, wa alaikum salam. How is it being covered in the Western media? Not at all, really. Not fairly. Not from the Palestinian side at all. I will try to say the Zionist regime because all of this is powered by the Zionist regime, and I will try not to label the Jewish people so much because we know there are Jewish people that do not support what's going on. But the Zionist regime has a very strong agenda. And interestingly enough, I heard this morning that they're using sort of the Goebbels technique from the Nazi regime, that if you repeat something often enough, people will believe it. And they have the most wonderful set of sound bites, and all they have to do is go back to a sound bite. Israel has the right to defend itself, land for people with the people without land, decapitated babies. None of these are substantiated, of course. But if you repeat it long enough, and people nowadays, we don't want to look, we don't want to study, we don't want to research. And also, we have not had the opportunity to hear other voices. They're silenced in the Western media. So, number one, Israel has the right to defend itself, of course, but this is not defense. This is not defense. This is occupation. This is atrocity. This is, a Holocaust perpetrated against people who suffered a Holocaust, really, when you think about it. So the sound bites carry a lot of weight. And no matter how much we work with the Jewish and Christian population here and our neighbors and friends, when they hear these sound bites, they think right away, ISIS, 9/11, They keep drawing these comparisons over and over. And they're very clever about this. All of the Western media sort of follows a scripted agenda. Unfortunately, it's not the journalism of the past. It's more scripted. And if you listen to various reporters, they're all saying the same thing over and over again. Alhamdulillah, due to social media, there is a very great exposure to other voices in the world. They talk about international support for Israel. It's not international. They only look at America. And we know very much it's a very white Eurocentric idea that fuels things, and that people of color anywhere in the world are thought of as less than 100% human. But thanks to social media, and a good part of social media is that we hear other voices at least now, and we have to propagate those as much as we can.
Are there people buying this stuff or they are more aware of what's going on?
I'd say they're buying it primarily. One particular thing that made me very sad is we've been participating in a group called Daughters of Abraham for many years. It's Jewish, Christian, and Muslim sisters. And it's a wonderful community. We love each other. We meet once a month and we pick topics and we discuss it from all 3 points of faith. And they're always amazed to learn about Muslims because they don't know very much. And suddenly, the minute October 7th happened and they were all running to side with Israel and we have to help and we have to support. And I was so sad and so betrayed that you don't even give us a minute to refute or rebut what's being said. And you immediately believe them, and you know us. We've talked about this before. You know us. So that was frustrating. We have a meeting tonight, and I said I couldn't go because I'm too angry. But some of the Muslim daughters are saying, please, please, you have to come, because I'm married to a Palestinian. So I am Palestinian by marriage. And my mother-in-law, may Allah have mercy on her, often said she's more Palestinian than Palestinians. I'm very supportive of their cause. Even a friend said to me, she said, "Oh, when you weren't a Muslim, you would have been siding with Israel." I said, "No, I wasn't. Even before I was Muslim, I was not siding with the Zionist agenda. I found it appalling and unjust and so forth, and I never understood the American support for this regime at all."
Are you receiving some offensive words or comments, or as you live your life after October the 7th?
I haven't heard from any of my friends any flack. We did have that one awful incident in Chicago where a young Palestinian boy was killed. That so far, alhamdulillah, has been a rarity. But so far, there isn't backlash. alhamdulillah, so far, but we're being warned, that we should be careful. I like to wear my Palestinian clothes and my scarf, but I'm careful that when I go out as a woman alone, I don't do that. When I go to functions, I tend to wear it, or if I visit friends, but I'm not going out visibly wearing Palestinian supportive clothing.
Many people in the West, including celebrities in the US and in the world, that posted support messages for Israel. Do you think this can be looked at like this?
No, and as I said, everybody has the right to defend themselves, including Palestinians. But in the case of the Zionist agenda, it's not self-defense, it's offense. And it has been since they entered the country. There are so many stories that, number one, historically, Muslims are the only people in the world that ever supported and took the Jews in when they were being persecuted elsewhere. We had no pogroms, we had no Holocaust, we saved Jews. It's well known, and the letter still exists from the Sultan at the time, of the Ottoman Sultan, how he invited the Jews after the Spanish Inquisition. When Islamic Spain fell back to the Christians, they invited the persecuted Jews to Ottoman lands, and they also went to Morocco and surrounding Muslim communities. They were welcomed and sheltered with open arms, which is about Turks helping the French Jews get out of France during the occupation. And many books on this subject, stories in Sarajevo, how people were saving the Jews and so forth. But they were always welcome in Muslim lands, and they thrived in Muslim lands. They thrived in Spain. They thrived in the Ottoman lands, of course. They were always given free rein to live as they wished to live and worship as they wished to worship. So it's very incongruous to me that the Zionist agenda is turning against Muslims in particular. That the only people that ever sheltered the Jews have been Muslims. And in fact, the stories are that the Palestinians welcomed these poor Holocaust survivors into their homes. Come into my home, I'll clothe you, I'll feed you. And after some time, the Jews kicked them out of their home and took over their home. I have family members. These are not made up stories. You hear them too often. They were sent away from their homes. And another thing I read the other day is that the Jewish inhabitants, the new ones of Palestine, kept very detailed records about how they entered the country, where they lived, who they lived with. And they referred to the Palestinians of the land as the foreigners, and spoke of them in a very deriding way. The people that were actually taking care of them and sustaining them and feeding them, housing them, clothing them. They would write later in the evenings in their journals how these foreigners are this, that, and the other thing, and we're going to kick them out very soon. I heard this from a Jewish historian.
So on that note, what kind of mindset does Zionists have while committing these horrible acts? What do you think goes through their mind? What is their mindset? What do they believe in, really?
Allahu alam, I don't know. The Zionists are not religious. It was a political agenda. It was not a religious agenda, but as we know, with the Crusades and other things like this, people use religious people to enact their dirty work for them. The popes wanted land, they wanted this, they wanted that, so they sent these poor, impoverished Christians to go down and fight the heathen Arabs, if you will. So the Zionists are using, particularly like the settlers are very Orthodox religious Jews, and they're sending them in to do battle for them, and increase the settlements and annoy and disturb the few Palestinian farmers and so forth that are their neighbors. So I don't know. People like to say it's a holy war. The Jews and Arabs have always hated each other, which is completely untrue. They lived peacefully for the millennia in Palestine. You just have to get away from the media machine, the Western media machine. Again, just turn to social media. What we find in the States, particularly that if anybody they know one Muslim, their neighbor, a coworker, somebody in the community, they have a completely different opinion of Muslims in general. So, of course, as Muslims, we need to at least gently and strongly state our point about this, about Palestine, about what's going on and so forth. They have to hear the other side.
So, in your life before Islam, we know that you sang in synagogues. Are you familiar with what they believe?
Yeah, a lot of times people would ask me as a singer, do I know what I'm singing in foreign languages? I said, well, yes, of course you have to. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to emote what's being said. Like any worship service, they were worshiping God, and sometimes they were telling stories from the Torah about their past and their heroes and so forth. But two things I wanted to talk about. One was that when they finished their High Holy Day services, they would all finish with next year in Jerusalem. And I actually looked up how long have they been saying that? Is that a recent thing since the state of Israel or not? So I looked it up, and actually since the 1500s they started saying this. And they said, actually the historian said it was a yearning for an imaginary place that they had lived in ages and ages ago. But the Orthodox Jews who do not support the Zionist regime will tell you, just as we know in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, they broke their covenant with Allah. They were the chosen people of Allah, of God, but they broke their covenant with him by not following the directives and following their religion as they should. So when Moses took them out of out of Pharaoh's land, they were not allowed back in. They wandered in the desert and probably in Jordan for many, many years. So that generation was never allowed into Palestine. They lost the right to be those people. So the more Orthodox Jews will say, we do not have the right to be there. We cannot be there. We are not supposed to be there yet because we broke our covenant. They admit they broke the covenant. These are the people, and they come to some of our Muslim conventions and they come supporting Palestine. They wear the Palestinian scarf and they proclaim, we are with you. We do not belong there. And what's going on in Israel is horrendous and atrocity and completely wrong, and against their religion for that matter. We had a cantor one time. Their cantor is the religious, he leads the music, which have a lot of music in their high holy days, a great deal of music. We went for breakfast, he ordered bacon, and when we got there, he was telling us stories how he loved to go to Palestine and take a bat and beat the legs of the Arabs. This was a religious leader, and none of this is made up.
What should a Muslim do to stop the persecution in Palestine? What is our role, our responsibility as individuals?
We can rise up against it. We can support those who defend themselves. And I think that as Muslims, we still have to be outspoken. We have to be ambassadors of Islam with our families and with our neighbors and with the public. We need to be very visible ambassadors of our faith. We need to walk the talk of Muslims, which means not just praying and fasting, but our neighbors don't see us doing that. But they do see how we behave. They do see how we conduct our businesses. They do see how we act in public. And are we generous? And are we thoughtful? And are we kind and compassionate? So we have to be all of those things. And we have to do whatever we can to support those very courageous and admirable Ghazans who are living through hell. If they're suffering the way they are and their iman is so strong, so incredibly strong, we have to speak up. What can we do? We're living in our cushy, warm homes in the United States. We have everything that we need. We have to do our part, which at least is speaking up. That's one of the three things we must do. You either change it with your hand or with your voice, or at least realize it's so bad. But I think we're beyond realizing that it's so awful in our hearts. We need to do something. At least we need to speak up. And my husband's extended family is Palestinian. And most of my friends in Jordan are Palestinian. My Arab friends are Palestinian. Or we're married to Palestinians. Other converts, we're all married to Palestinians. So we have a great deal of things in common. And I can tell you horror stories about how we are abused when we go to visit Palestine as well. We're abused by the Israelis at the airport and along the streets and so forth. SubhanAllah, it's not easy, but we go.
May Allah allow us to see the good days of Palestine.
Inshallah, in our lifetime. Inshallah, we will see those days, but I'm not sure it's our lifetime, but inshallah.